Okay, so I'm gonna do some reflections on the society, specifically the medical industry. It seems to be focused, at least from my education and my understanding, being a patient, um, and my education not in medical school, but all the textbooks for medical school. Most of patient management is pain management. Why that is because many times when people develop a disease or just a health problem that's enough to warrant going to the hospital or the ER or something, the damage is usually too far gone. It's usually lifetime decisions of behaviors and ingesting certain things. And so as a doctor, you can't really fix, especially when most patients are non-compliant. And I can say that as a nurse. Most of my patients were non-compliant, meaning they don't stick to the regimens that they were prescribed, whether it's medication or diet or exercise or anything, because people are just going to do what they're comfortable doing with, not with, which is what they've always pretty much done, and they're not going to change that much. I never believed that growing up. I always thought you can teach an old dog new tricks, but I mean, you can teach an old dog new tricks, but I guess the analogy, people don't want to change. So, aside from pain management, obviously, symptom reduction. So, for example, I'll use cardiovascular disease, which is probably the leading health issue everywhere. So, cardiovascular disease happens, your heart's always pumping, there's always, it always needs to be on, it doesn't take a rest like a lot of other organs in our body. So when it's stressed, it'll break down, the tissue will break down. If it's physical stress, it could even be emotional stress. It can be anything that just damages the cell. And so what symptom reduction ends up looking like is taking medications that will affect how the cell functions. There's a lot of different type of tissue cells in your heart that make up your heart. So it's possible to, make the molecule that'll affect only a specific cell. But the problem is that it's very general, the way that genetics works. And so if you have, so generally they're proteins. There's also like ion channels in the cell wall that will allow certain molecules and chemicals and stuff to go through and come out, and so that it can do its function. Most of it though is functioning off of like electron transfer and stuff like that. So that's too complicated. My point is, those same medications will help the symptoms and allow your body to heal a little bit marginally. But the problem is that the medication is also going to, first of all, affect your liver because it's digesting all of that, and other tissues, just generalized problems that, they're just like side effects of medications or, like just other things that happen. And it's kind of like random because you might not have a deficiency that's noticeable until you do the drugs, and then it starts to affect, and then it's like, well, you're just sensitive to that drug. That's what you get told at the doctors. So that all that said, that's fine. That's helping, right? You're ameliorating problems. You're helping reduce pain. That's good. That's a net positive. My problem is genetic sequencing. We understand DNA. We have understood it for over 20 years, completely, you know, from one end of the DNA strand to the other, what the sections do, what they build, how they build on themselves, right? The parts they don't put in any of the textbooks is that, how all that happens. Because they'll talk about it. They'll talk about this DNA fragment does these things, and we learned genetic modification by, there's different ways that they do it, but they could either mess with the electrons by like sending waves into the cell and causing conformational changes that affect the DNA. Or they'll, in a separate chamber, that other one is hard because it's in vivo. It's like the cell has to be alive, and how do you get it into the machine, and like then transplant it back into the body? The other way is you exogenously develop the very specific, it's like a virus, like it's going to carry the load into the genetic sequence area, and then it's going to let it go, and then the DNA is going to just pick it up because it's like a magnet, and it's going to incorporate it into its genetic structure. Okay, so we've known that for 20 years. We've claimed to have made entire species of replication just by copying, not necessarily knowing exactly what everything does, but like, hey, this was a functional living thing that we just recreated, right? So we understand. Most DNA is protein sequencing. It's gonna be on that border of the cell. And so I was gonna say this at the end, but how do you know that all of your groceries didn't grow in a lab? How do you know that all the like meat and dairy and everything wasn't just grown in a lab and it was never actually attached to, you know, the greater species or organism? You know what I mean? Like the root of the plant. Most of its function is to like absorb the nearby nutrients that it needs to grow. But if we could just supply them directly, then we don't need the root, right? Similarly with, like, say you go buy chicken at the store. The chicken's already, it's not like a chicken that they just killed. It's already processed and cut up and everything for you to eat. How do you know they didn't just make it that way? Like, how do you know they didn't just slap some skin tissue over the meat tissue and then like put some nerves in there? Like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, so you don't know. That's my point. I could just maybe not understand, and everybody knows that this is the case. But so if everybody knows this is the case, why did we stop there? Like, genuine question, why did we stop there? Because the whole reason why I'm even bringing this up is if you have a population and you can't legislate people into being good, meaning you can't just add more rules and then expect people to follow them just because you added them and said that they were right. But that does cause a little bit of an ethical issue because not every law is right or morally, like, superior. And it might be the case that laws are actually immoral. So it makes sense that people would make this judgment of, am I going to follow these laws or not? And as a government, you have to take that into consideration because of dissent. You have to take that into consideration because people are not going to listen. So it's like, if you have a weak government and they show that they are weak, then no one's going to listen. So that would be a good thing if the government is evil. It would be a bad thing if the government is good. So that's where information is valuable and important. So instead of making more rules, hoping people will find the good in them and do the good in them, you can just have every informational field lead to like a useless, I'll say what I wrote down, a useless abyss of eternal selfish desire, and legally call the pursuit of it, the pursuit of its attainment, virtue. So if you effectively, you just convinced everybody this is the maximal information, I know you're not going to listen to me, so in every other avenue I'm going to say this, and then the laws, which are what you're supposed to reference, right, for like the structure, they're going to be misleading and complicated, so that you're like, well, it has to be because it's a complicated system and I don't understand it. But I do understand this virtue, and I understand that the attainment of its pursuit is what is good, and it makes me feel good, right? Effectively, as a government, you just made it so that you don't have to fix anything. You just made it so that you don't have to give anything or progress or like nothing other than what you have already convinced people is the maximum. And so that you have an entire population that's just cattle. For what? If we know the genetic sequencing, if we know all this stuff, why aren't we fixing things? And well, think about it this way. If the government was evil and just didn't want to help people, that's the government we live in. But if the government knew that people were not going to be that great, why would you give them something good for them to just, like, tarnish it, right? So you don't. And that's where because I'm educated. I went to college, I didn't graduate, but I am definitely literate. Like, I understand books, and I can kind of understand the subcontext, because in a world where you could have said it anyway, and you're going to use specific words and ideas and kind of like pull emotional strings, there's ways that you can not pull emotional strings and still give the same information. But instead, all of the textbooks pull the emotional strings, and then you're just left with believing that, well, this person was put on a pedestal, their book was, it's been revered for so long, for all these years, and they were fundamental in the construction of this type of society, and blah blah blah. Like, who am I to say anything about that? Like, I don't write a whole book like that. Like, I don't have the brain to write a whole book, but like, you are the book though, right? So how can you convince people on such a large scale that something useless is useful? Well, every informational field has to reflect that. So that's where you get the burning of the books. That's where you get people being silenced. Because, like, say you're an immoral person, and you're a bad person, and you only are a good person because your whole life you've been punished if you were slightly bad, or slightly not pursuing this selfish virtue, which is wholly consuming your mind. Because as far as speech goes, as far as communication goes, if you're accessing the brain, like, you're basically just deterring the brain by telling somebody they have to use both sides, and like, you have to maximize like the most slowest part of your brain, which is speech. You have to maximize that. For what though? For what? Right? If science and math is what makes the world's technologies, it's what runs the world basically, it's what enables us to do less labor, have less illnesses, have less diseases, just have things that are useful that can help, that have the potential to help, right? Why don't we just focus on that? Why don't we just focus on teaching people what I just said in like 7 minutes? It took me many, many years because to kind of just like get that mindset, because everybody lies and everybody pretends that this isn't the case because they don't want to personally admit how far gone they are, how deep in the shit they are. And so it's just easier for them to go back to their virtue that is fake and it's made up and it's just a belief. It's not based in knowledge by the sense of information. It's based in knowledge by the sense of biology, like biological limits. So, I'm very deeply disappointed, but it does make it sound like if you go to school, they're going to tell you the rich people are the people who pursue the virtue. They're the ones who attain the virtue. And poverty is those who don't. But the entire time, neurologically, scientifically, like, undeniably, it's just damage. You are damaging your body. Like, if you choose to believe that you can... you're ignoring the rest of your body. Like, your body is actually... Like your heart is going to give out because emotionally you put heart mathematically somewhere, and then, like, spatially your body is also getting confused because it's like, oh, well, you told me everything was the heart, so now I don't know what the heart is. Like, but it's not going to tell you, like, words. How do you communicate with your body? Words? No. Because when I think about my muscles and I think about, like, when I'm working out, it's kind of like an MRI. It's like I can visualize the shapes and the contours and where I'm putting the energy, and it makes me be able to work out better and not get hurt when I work out. And if I want to push myself to my absolute maximum limit, I can and not get hurt because I listen to my body, right? That's not... I wanted to do physical therapy before. I still do study some physical therapy stuff, but it's not a well care system. You don't care for well people. You don't amplify their wellness. And to me, that's just a slave system. That means you're just, like, the time you're trying to buy, or like whatever, by all this stagnation is really just people refusing to change. And I know that pretty much everything that I said can be turned back on me because I don't do the linguistic math thing, which is so stupid. And if you want to say I do it with my body, okay. Just because I follow the structures of something doesn't mean that it indicates anything deeper than how slow those structures move, if that makes sense. So if my brain is moving at 1 billion miles an hour and words move at 100 miles an hour, you're going to say that's fast because you walk at like 5 miles an hour. And if you're basing, like, how many hundreds can I fit into 1 billion? That's how many thoughts I can have while you focus on your syllables. And that's imagination. So don't know. And hated. And tortured and bullied and ostracized. Thank you, society, for being so understanding and kind. God really wanted this.